Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Jeremiah Lorig. I serve as Director of Media Relations for the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and today we are joined by a very exciting guest, the CEO of Heroic Pictures, the filmmaker Timothy Mahoney. Hey Tim, welcome to the show.
Well, hello, Jeremiah. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. Today we'll be discussing the art of storytelling through film, specifically how history can be told through the lens of film. So, Tim, could you tell us a little bit about your background in the film industry?
Yes, I'd love to. When I was growing up, I didn't think I was going to be a filmmaker. I thought I was going to be a musician. And so I was very involved with music and really enjoyed that. But when I was 18 years old, I saw a movie in a theater for the first time. I grew up in a conservative home and we didn't go to movies. But I heard about a film called The Hiding Place, which was a story about this family, Corrie ten Boom and her family in Holland, and they were hiding Jewish people during World War II. And I went and saw that movie. It was produced by the Billy Graham Association. They had a division called Worldwide Pictures. And when I saw it, it was the first time I'd ever seen a theatrical film. And it was, first of all, a powerful story. And secondly, the power of the cinema, having a large, screen and the sound and the story all combined. I was awestruck by that. And I ended up going to a Christian college and took an associate's degree. And then I heard about a local college that had offered a film course that you could get a degree in. And that's when I really started to think, well, maybe I could do this for a living. And that was quite a while ago, back in the 1977. And ever since then, I've been working at being a filmmaker.
That's incredible. And one of the things that I love about film as a medium is that it's a way to visually tell stories. And I find it fascinating that you started by being interested in music, because music is something that, to me, touches my soul when words come up short. And so one of the things that I find films do is they're able to move past words. And not to say words are not important. Words are crucially important in so many ways, but sometimes they're inadequate, and we need the music. And in this case of film, we also have the visual stimulus to engage our souls in a deep way that goes beyond what we could read on a page. Is when you're working on a project, how do you translate words on a page into something that can go beyond the limits of language?
Well, I think it's very important I'm not sure how many homeschoolers we have watching this right now and their families, but first of all, what you're talking about is incredibly true. In some cases, the music, the soundtrack is possibly even more important than the picture. Now, some people would say if you divided a film between what's more powerful, the sound or the image, just watch something without sound, and you realize that it doesn't have anywhere the emotional impact. But you could hear something and not be in the room and hear a movie soundtrack and the dialogue, and it would captivate you. That's the power of that. So sometimes we would give 51% to the soundtrack and 49% to the visual. They're both important. When you bring them together, what's significant about this time in history is that we are able to tell stories. Before, stories were told around a campfire, and now those stories have moved from campfire to radio, and there was radio drama, and now they created cinema, and the cinematic story is important. And why is it? It's because we were created. We're the only beings that God has created that actually communicate through story, and we get our view of the world through stories. That's why that is so significant.
Well, and what you said about the layering on where you're able to communicate so much more the more you add to it. I remember when I was a kid, I grew up listening to Adventures in Odyssey. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was an audio
Absolutely.
drama.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I loved that. I grew up in Colorado Springs, so I was able to go to the headquarters where they would talk about everything that they did there, and they had a presentation that has forever shaped me because what they did is they said, okay, here's just the track with the words, with the actors speaking. And then they layered on it, here's it with the Foley, the sounds, the sound effects.
Mhm.
And then they added into it, I forget what the third layer was,
Would it be music or ambience?
the ambiance. And then the last track was the music. And it was incredible to hear that same 20 seconds is probably what it was, 4 times, and how the impact of what I heard increased exponentially. It wasn't just double, it was exponential increase every time they added to make the story come alive in a way that could reach out with their message in a way that a little Jeremiah could understand it and have it blossom in his heart and mind.
The reason for that is that what happened is that you became a part of the story. And so the way God created us is that in fact, sometimes it's the most powerful audible storytelling, because you can actually be in the room with people. Now in movies, you're in the scene in a sense. Once you get to a place where you are actually feeling like you're in the experience of a film, that is when the film is working at its highest level. Same thing with audio, is that you're participating in the story, and God created us for that. If you think about when Christ came, he told parables, and he told parables that were ones that caused people to think deeply. Well, what does that mean? The parable of the talents or the prodigal son, and looking at things differently. But that was because God created us for story, and that we're in a battle right now for stories. There's something called a moral center of good in a story, and there's a hero in a story. And what ends up happening is that hero comes with a set of rules of how they would live. And we used to have a good set of rules. We used to have a virtuous set of rules and stories. And what has happened in the last 50 to 60 years is that moral center of good has been flipped. It's been turned around so that good things are evil now and evil things are good, because they were able to do that because they used stories. They changed the hero's character and made him, in many ways, an anti-hero. And now people are watching films and shows that have all sorts of things that have no virtue in them.
Well, and it just shows that stories they're not just a faith-based thing or a non-faith-based thing. The reality is that people are always impacted by stories. And so in our audience, many of the people who are going to be listening to this podcast will come from a faith background and tradition, and many will not. But what's amazing is that that's something that can unite people, is the fact that stories teach us deep things, and they pull us towards those ideas that make us reflect on what is good, what is beautiful, what is true, and how can we then as people pursue those things.
Absolutely. And I think the thing I love about homeschoolers, and my wife and I homeschooled 2 of our children. I should say she did most of the homeschooling.
As is often the case.
Yeah, and then we have a number of our staff here that are either homeschoolers. In fact, there are 3 of them that were homeschooled, and some of those are homeschooling as well. And so, why is that important? And I think it's important because they learn they basically, I think, are learners. And being in the film industry, and I had to learn, I had to basically get a camera in my hands and try to understand how to look through it. How do you see a picture, Like, have you ever seen those directors where they're kind of going like this, they're kind of getting an
Yes.
idea, what does the shot look like? And they're trying to see a frame, right?
Hmm.
And I do the same thing. And there was a period of time when I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I couldn't quite understand was could I see a shot? Could I frame a shot? And I ended up praying. And about a week or two later, all of a sudden I had this ability to see shots. I could just, oh, there's a shot and there's a shot, so when you mix the emotion of a frame, because a frame is kind of taking, saying, I'm going to look at certain parts of this frame, so there's that part of the frame I'm looking at, and you can frame it left or right. By the way, the audience needs to know that there is a language. They actually have defined languages within the frames. So that means there's a particular style of film language that associates itself. So when you watch a sitcom, people are not in the story. They're clearly wide shot to second shot. It's more like a play.
Okay.
But there are other types of frames where the camera will come over my shoulder, and instead of being outside of the shot, all of a sudden it comes over and it's looking straight at the person. Now that means that the audience has been invited to be the person or inside that person's viewpoint. So that they're looking straight into the eyes of someone like that, And that is the power of the camera. And then when you talk about, you add the atmosphere of the waves coming in, and then you hear the seagulls. You could practically smell the surf. And then you add, the word and the drama and the skill of the actor. And then put a cello in there. And all of a sudden, you have heightened this experience beyond anything that you could have. It's even sometimes more powerful than real life.
Yeah, well, and it's remarkable how stories and how we tell stories can be shaped by some of it's the art of figuring out how to communicate that idea well, and some of it's very practical. And I would love to hear if you have any good stories about the practical side. When I was in college, I was in a film club, and I was playing the role of a character in this show, and I was very bad at memorizing script. So we ended up, my character got a lot of close shots because we would be holding the script right off the camera, and I'd be more or less reading it as I was performing my role. And so my character ended up being a much more intimate character than some of the more action characters that we had in the show, because we wanted to catch the action, and so we had a lot of wider shots. But do you have any examples of kind of the practical ways that the limitations around you led to artistic decisions?
Right. Battle scenes. The American Miracle that's coming out June 9th, 10th, and 11th. And if people really want to urge you to get movie tickets for this, and get them now, because it's only a limited 3-day release. This film had very practical applications where we had to have 4 or 5 cameras filming, because we do the Battle of Monongahela, where young George Washington is with General Braddock. If anyone knows the story, in around 1750, he is going out there on a patrol with a large British contingent and they're ambushed. And it's a horrible ambush where many British officers are killed, and it's just a shock. And we had to film that the very first day we started our movie, because the timing and getting everyone there. So that meant that we had to get the actors all dressed and all the Native Americans into their war paint. And there was probably, I don't know, I think about 70 actors that we had to use. And when you're shooting and you have to get as many shots, because you only can, do this, the sun is actually starting to come down. Let's say you get started at 3 or 4 o'clock, and then you've got three hours before sunset. So you've got to get the marching scenes, the different camera angles, high angles, low angles. You can't do it with just one camera. You have to have multiple cameras rolling all at the same time. That's just one example. But we also had to stage all of the getting people into makeup and costumes. Some people needed to go to costumes first, and some people needed to go to makeup first, depending on how much they had to do, because somebody's war paint could take a half hour, or to put in feathers and all the different things. By the way, we used the original descendants of the original natives that were in the battle.
Oh, wow.
So we were very authentic, and then we were firing guns. So we had to have safety protocols taught. And because of the potential for someone to be shot or injured, we had to make sure that there was no live ammunition. And then we're dealing with horses and guns. And the horses had to be the type of horses that would not do something dangerous and get scared and run over people and throw someone off a horse. So you have all those dynamics that you're dealing with.
It sounds like the filmmaking is an exercise in logistics, maybe like being a homeschool mom.
Exactly. In fact, a homeschool mom would be a very good producer for a movie, because she's had to run a lot of logistics and get people here and there. And then you're kind of, you've got to look at, did we get what we need? Is it correct? And I'm sure, like a homeschool mom, you're trying to go, I need to grade these papers and make sure they actually know what they've got. And we have to say, did we get the shot? Is it good? Because we're not coming back here. This has to happen. And one of the things that I missed in the beginning was people being shot. I had a lot of battle, a lot of guns firing, but not enough people being shot.
Oh, no.
So I had to get the British in the same costumes and everything, and get more of those shots later on.
So you're talking about The American Miracle, which is your newest project.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get involved in that? What was the story behind you telling this story?
Yes, well, The American Miracle, I just dropped my book. I'll grab it here. Is actually from this book by Michael Medved. And Michael and I have known each other for probably 20 years, and he has written many books. One book that was before this, of his, I think, 10 or 12 books, was called 10 Lies About America. And that kind of led him to writing. There's a lot of misinformation about our history, and pretty much saying that America is a bad place, and it's, was based on bad ideas and everything. Well, Michael, he's a historian. He went to Yale, and he ended up, also, his father talked to him an awful lot about America. Michael's Jewish, and their family came from Ukraine and survived. Many of his family members were killed. And so he wanted to, his wife said, you should tell the story. You need to tell our children. And then from there, he basically took and developed this this story, I should say, about God's providential hand on America. And this film is going to be in theaters, and I really strongly encourage, if homeschool parents, we were at the HSLDA event in Nashville last year and had a showing, and it was incredibly well accepted and endorsed by, I can't recall his name right off the top, but the head of it, of HSLDA. And this film is going to be in theaters June 9, 10, and 11. If people go to AmericanMiracleMovie.com, AmericanMiracleMovie.com, they can get tickets. And I think it's a really important film because, once again, it tells the dramatic story of God's miraculous protection of George Washington, and then later on to the miraculous providential protection of the Continental Army, all the way through to the signing of the Constitution.
Do you have a particular story that jumped out at you, or maybe something you didn't know before you started this project that it would be like a gem that would catch people's attention or should
Yes,
be known and isn't?
I think that I could give you briefly three.
Okay.
I think that I didn't understand really how many times George Washington was spared from the time he got smallpox through the attempts to kill him, and then there's a Native American prophecy that we film at the campfire later on that Washington is told this prophetic word, and it was recorded by his doctor who was there, and these kinds of providential guidance, and I think Washington. The other thing that was amazing is that when he started to lead the Continental Army, in the very beginning, Washington the Continental Army was facing the biggest empire of the world at that time, the British Empire, and they came with all their might, and it was a very awful beginning to the war, and we're going to show you. The story of Washington being spared of complete, in the Continental Army, of complete annihilation when a fog mysteriously comes in during the night, and Washington and the army are able to escape on boats hidden by fog. There's British ships all around. We show all this, and they escape across the East River. Now, what's interesting is that right after that, a little while later after that, Washington crosses the Delaware by inspiration in another unusual storm, a winter storm, and he takes Trenton. And we're going to show and tell that story. Those
Wow. And that's one of those stories where the American casualties are against all odds, incredibly small.
right.
And then they ended up capturing almost an entire army. It's mind blowing. That's how that happens. Like I think what it sounds like what you're saying is there's these miracles that are the odds are just so wild that we need to understand these stories because history would have been so different if things had gone just a little bit any direction other than the way they actually ended up going.
We don't tell this in the film, but what happened is that one of the generals, I think it was a general that Washington was counting on to be a part of the crossing the Delaware, did not do it. He went to, I believe, Philadelphia because he thought Washington was going to be, taken. He was going to be defeated, and Washington was left I think another group hardly was able to. I don't know if they could get across either. So he didn't have the full strength that he wanted, but God blinded in many ways the eyes of the sentries because of the snow. They ended up deciding to leave their post and come in. No one would travel at this time. And then Washington appears. But here's the thing I didn't know is that the British were incredibly cruel and merciless to the Americans because they considered them traitors. But in Washington could have been the same. He could have been they could have killed all their prisoners, like what was happening with the British. But Washington said that's not the kind of nation we're going to be, and he had a nobility in the sense not to be like a king, but he had a virtuous understanding, and I think he set the tone for the nation of civility and what the nation would become. And to me, that was one of the more powerful things. I realized that I believe God chose George Washington, spared his life numerous times, and this film shows you a number of those times when he was spared, and then shows that he brought that along. Everyone respected him. They realized that God had his hand on his life. I believe even King George realized that there's something incredibly special about George Washington, and we talk about this in the film.
Wow. Well, and of course, it's easy for us to look at history, and I want to talk about what draws you to stories rooted in history for your filmmaking. But as a reflection before we get there, the people like George Washington, it's easy for us to say, oh, wow, they had a reason to exist. They impacted the world. Their lives really mattered. But one of the things that I find fascinating about history is George Washington's life didn't happen in a vacuum. He was surrounded by countless people who the history books do not remember, and their lives impacted his as well. It's not like the world is only impacted by the big and the bold, the great and the good. That history books make us memorize their names and dates, but history is made of countless people walking through life, making little decisions that ripple out and impact literally countless lives.
I agree, and I think that I have this company called Heroic Pictures, and some people say, well, my wife would actually confront me on this, say, well, not everybody's going to be a hero, and I said, but you know what? I said, being heroic means to do the right thing, and to have courage that whether you do the right thing and anybody knows about it is a heroic decision, And
I was going to say, well, one of my biggest heroes is my mom, and it's largely because she chose to do this difficult thing called homeschooling me. I was a handful maybe I still am, but little kid who struggled with reading, dyslexic, so many things that made my life, or made me a challenge in her life, and she still chose to be a hero. And how I define a hero, I think yours is a fascinating definition, but how I define a hero is somebody who inspires us to be more than we currently are.
right.
And my mom, in her self-sacrifice and her willingness to do that difficult thing in raising little Jeremiah as somebody who would have been labeled as special needs and all those things, she instead rose to the occasion. And to this day, all these years later, I still find inspiration in that, because what she did is she was faithful in the little things.
I couldn't agree more. My mother is also my hero, and I think of all my siblings, my family, my father was a Korean War veteran, decorated, and I believe that he had been abused as a child, by the way, and during a tragic, he lost his mother, then was abused, and then he went off to war, and he ended up having a lot of anger. He became a police officer, and later on a state highway patrol, but he had this volatile anger, and it got to the place where we couldn't live with my father anymore. It was too dangerous, and so my mother, with 4 children, had to leave. And eventually, the family was officially broken, and we no longer even had any contact with my father. He left. He went to California. So my mother heroically raised us, took us to church. She was a pianist, and I was at church a lot. And she just had faith that God would provide. Some people would say, well, why did you make those films on Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus? Why was it so important? I said, because my mom believed in the Bible, and she believed if God could protect and be with Moses and the Israelites, that he would protect and be with us. And I think our founding fathers had a sense of God's involvement. I don't think they did. They talked about it, and that's what the American miracle, Our Nation is No Accident, is about. It's that same testimony, and I think our mothers had that testimony of, reliance on God. And no one hardly knows my mom except a few people in our family and those neighbors and the people at church. But she was one of the biggest heroes in my life.
Wow. Well, when we're talking about history, whether it's our personal family history or the history of our nation, what draws you to stories rooted in history, and how do you decide which stories you want to tell?
What happened to me was, when my family broke up, I was in the 5th grade, and I didn't understand at the time until I got a little bit older, but I didn't care at all about school. I had moved from our family home. We lived with relatives, and then I went to 2 other schools, and I didn't care at all about homework or anything until the 11th grade. And I started reading, and I went in the library, and I started reading about events in the Civil War. I would get books out, and it just captivated me. And part of the reading happened because I actually had a bad S. I had and I went to speech therapy, and in speech you have to read. And then they said, well, since he's reading, let's put him in more reading and advanced reading and speed reading. And that got me involved with history because I didn't know any of these things really happened, like the Civil War. And well, who was involved and what battle was that? And these battles were interesting to me. The characters were interesting. And I started to have a love for history because it was what had happened earlier. It's how we got here. And that, I think, really began expanding to understanding more of a consciousness of, well, where do I live? What happened where I live? And for example, Native American events happened here. Custer actually left not far from here to go out to the Battle of, I think, was it Little Bighorn?
Little Bighorn.
Fort Snelling was here. All sorts of different things happened in the area where we live. There were missionaries here to the Native Americans that most people don't know about, not far away. And so you go any place in the world, and there's a story about the people and what happened. And then I just became more and more curious about all of it. And that I think is how I became interested in the historical stories and looking for. Ultimately, we created a foundation called Patterns of Evidence Foundation, and the whole mission is to look for evidence of God acting in history, in events, and in the lives of people. And that's been the role, and that's how I got involved with this film project, The American Miracle.
Wow. And so when you're telling a story, telling these stories of history, they're big, they're complicated. How do you balance being extremely loyal to the actual events and also taking whatever creative license you need to engage the audience and pull them in and simplify the stories the way they can be distilled down to a bite size that the audiences can digest?
Great question. And I hired a historian, James Gallagher, and he was our film historian. He helped me with all of the historical authenticity of costumes, locations, carriages, weapons, and all of that. And he knew that I held a really high standard of wanting it to be historically accurate. Then I had other historians help me. Michael Medved is a historian, and so he had what's upside down. He had basically put this together. So I followed this and the structure of how to tell the story. There are some pieces that I needed to add in. I needed to add more stories of people of color, for example, because they weren't the big characters. They were other characters within it. But that was a very important component to understanding our history right now. And
wanted to hit the high notes and the low notes.
Yeah, in slavery. And so then we wanted to go to the actual locations. So we filmed in Mount Vernon, at Mount Vernon, and inside the house. We filmed our George Washington, Daniel Shippey, an incredible George Washington, excellent actor, and his wife, Kelly. And they played George and Martha Washington. And he was the official George Washington for about 3 years at Mount Vernon. We filmed him sitting at George Washington's desk. And I don't know that that's ever been done before, where we've been able to have that kind of access. So we went to the places where the events happened. Daniel Webster speaking at Faneuil Hall in Boston. 200 years earlier, that's where he was, and that's where we filmed. We went to Fort Frederick, where the battle was for the Monongahela battle. So all these things, for me, if you're going to make it, my rule is we have to make it completely authentic, and if we possibly can get into the authentic locations, and that's what we did with The American Miracle. Our Nation is No Accident.
And how do you do that in terms of conversations? Because not every conversation is actually recorded word for word.
Right. Well, part of it is that you have to look at what was written in letters.
Uh-huh.
So we went, there's a lot of documentation, a lot of notes that Washington gave. So when we talk about Washington saying certain things, like prayer, I actually used the letter the words that he used when he talked about prayer. And then I think it was James Madison recorded during the Constitution. He recorded Ben Franklin talking about prayer.
Mhm.
He just took notes. And then John Adams and Abigail, we got their letters and we used their words there. And in all those instances, we were working at giving who they were. And the other thing is Robert George from Princeton. What a lot of times we've been told by historians that are from Ivy League schools or whatever that the founding fathers were deists and that they didn't really believe in a God who answered prayer. And that's not the case. And even with Ben Franklin, Robert George will say that he, in his letters and his own documents to his family, talked about prayer. And that this film is about a God who answers prayer. And Washington and Franklin and Adams, I mean, these men were people that I believe had a strong faith. And Ben Franklin actually was involved with the Great Awakening prior with what was it George? Was it George Whitefield?
Whitefield, probably.
Yeah. He was friends with him. He published his sermons.
Interesting.
So,
and he was a publisher. He was printing his newspapers.
Right. Yeah. So there's so much that that's the reason why going back to original sources and understanding and having an opportunity to dramatize this, I consider this film an incredible privilege. It's an honor, and it's also a responsibility. And when you have filmmakers that are in your audience that want to be filmmakers, I had to make other films prior to making this film in order for me to know how to make this film. And so I've probably made 1,000 productions. I don't know. I haven't kept track. I used to have a huge wall of all the masters, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I think just in the Pattern series, there's like 800, videos of varying types. But what it is that you don't start out with the big movie. You start out making smaller movies and smaller films and smaller videos. And you start to understand, I talked about the camera, about how to use the camera, where to place the camera. And then you start working on sound. You have to have sound, right. We all know when someone's not mic'd because they sound echoey. So you've got to deal with the sound, and then you start dealing with music, and you have to then work with acting and the type of people that would be able to act out a scene. And all those different kinds of tools are what help to communicate a story.
And speaking of the story of this particular project, The American Miracle, you said it's coming out June 9th through the 11th. What are the central messages or central themes that homeschoolers should be looking for when they go to see it?
I think that where do our rights come from is one. We're going to be talking about that. The fact that what was the cause of the American Revolution was that people didn't feel that their rights were being honored. That there were laws, taxation without representation. I do remember that. And we're going to basically unfold that. And this film is going to give you an overview to understand the basic reasons why the colonists felt that England was being unjust. And then you're going to know about the fact that the book of Genesis is where these founders got these ideas. They saw that people were made in the image of God, and he endowed them with certain rights, unalienable rights. And these are scholars that are backing all this up. That's where these ideas come from. But not only that, but they also knew that man was fallen, and that they could sin and they could do things that are selfish and evil to one another. So they had to create a government that recognized that all people had rights, but that they also were fallen. So how do you make a government that does that? You're going to see that in this movie, because we're going to take you through the drama and the battles, and we're going to take you that leads. They've fought this revolution. Now they're free. Now what? Now they have to create a constitution. And what are the basic premises? What are the pillars of the Constitution? And that's what this film is going to also give you. And I don't know if anyone knows this or not, but just in the last years, they've been surveying people. And I think last year they did a survey, 3,500 college students, 70% of them couldn't pass a citizenship test. So that's pretty alarming. I know that wouldn't be the case with homeschoolers, but there's a lot of people in America that don't know our history. They don't know what it's how it's created. And this film is a huge opportunity to dramatically and entertainment-wise learn about our history and our founding. And more importantly, is to see that God had a huge part in our nation.
Wow. So it sounds like you're saying that this would be a good educational experience to take homeschool students to?
Absolutely. I think, in fact, we're going to create a homeschool curriculum from this material.
Oh, wow.
And I think that
Will that be
everything
available before the June dates for the showing, or
we're
will that be
working on,
coming out afterwards?
it'll be coming out afterwards, because we're going to create more. The goal is to create more of these films.
Oh, okay. So a whole series.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll share with you is that, whether the homeschooler believes is Christian or not, the history in this film is all documented. And it was the understandings that the founders had and what they wrote and what has been written into the documents. That's what we've been working on. So everything is historically accurate. It's how you interpret it. Do some people believe that, well, was this God, or was this a whole string of lucky things that happened? But the founding fathers and the British and other nations said this must have been the providence of God, because there's no way this little ragtag group of people could have defeated the largest empire, the army, without some of these miraculous events that happen.
Wow. Well, it sounds like a great adventure, and it sounds like your own little ragtag team of people. This homeschool dad working with other homeschoolers and other experts in the field, coming together to produce this film project that's going to be released in June of this year. So, can you remind us where to go to get more information about this?
The easiest to say is AmericanMiracleMovie.com. AmericanMiracleMovie.com. You can watch a trailer. You can also buy your tickets, and I suggest that you buy them now, because this is only out for 3 days right now, and we're in a lot of cities. About 800 theaters are the film will be in. And if you go to that website, you can sign up, and we'll give you more information. That'll keep you in the community, that as we continue to unfold homeschool products and more videos. There's a lot there. There's a lot of resources there, by the way. In fact, if you go to the resource page, your audience can spread the word. Where we've been working on trying to get matinees. So you should look and see if there's a matinee, because we've been trying to get a homeschool matinees going in this event, in the showing as well. And not all the theaters have given us one, but some of them have. So those are some of the things that, and we want to be a good resource for homeschoolers. And like I said, there were homeschoolers that were on the production crew. I'm a homeschool dad. And we had homeschoolers that were acting in the film as well as extras. And so it's been a great experience being with homeschoolers, because I think the thing that I appreciate is that homeschoolers have a lot of initiative. to be self-learners. And as a filmmaker, I've had to be a self-learner, and our team, we're constantly learning how to do things because the world keeps changing. Cameras keep changing, technology changes. But one thing that doesn't change is stories. That we were created for storytelling and for hearing stories. And that's why having good stories is so important.
It's a great note to end on. Thank you very much, Tim, for being here today and joining us in this illuminating conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. And
Well,
thank you,
you.
everybody, all our listeners, for joining us today. Don't forget that if you're not a member of HSLDA, we'd love to have you join us. You can go to our website, hslda.org/join, and be sure to get tickets for The American Miracle. It is in theaters June 9th through the 11th. It's in 800 theaters across the nation. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you have a great day. And thanks, Tim, for being here.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye, man.